zenu. Nimechelewa kidogo. I came from Kigali last night after WEF. So I have no slides, but I'll talk about my experience backing startups in East Africa. In fact, the last 2 days in Kigali, I was fundraising. So a lot of people forget that even investors have to fundraise. I can even talk about how we do that and what lessons startups can learn from that. But just I'll give you a quick overview of that. So me and my partner in the fund, Paul Bregel, who mentored me in Silicon Valley, he's been to Tanzania a few times. We've worked with Costech, with the Buni Hub, and a bunch of other projects. But ultimately, we settled on starting our work in Kenya. And I've been there for 3 years. We invested in 10 startups there. And then invested an additional 12 in Uganda. There we invested in 2, South Africa 3, Ghana 3, Nigeria now 4, and Zimbabwe 1. And Tanzania, 0. Yes, and I'm Tanzanian, just to remind you. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But essentially, I now moved. The first thing I did after 3 years of investing in Kenya is move back to Tanzania. I moved to Arusha, so I'm halfway between Nairobi and to also be able to come to Dar. And that should hopefully help me look at more Tanzanian startups. But essentially, you have 2 other partners in the fund, and it just made sense at the time to focus on Kenya because it was much further ahead in traction. But I have looked at Tanzanian startups. In fact, at least 3 or 4 that got close to us investing, but never quite made the finish line. In fact, one probably more of conflict of interest. As a fund manager, I have to be very accountable. I can't just back my friends. They have to really pass the bar. So there's one that I almost backed, but it was too close, I guess. So I want to talk about a few things around fundraising for startups that I've learned the last 3 or 4 years of investing in Africa. I think the first thing I realized quickly was how there were basically 3 or 4 different segments of fundraising for startups. So you have what I call Western-backed venture capital funding foreigners coming to Africa, right? And so because of the ecosystems are more developed in the West, Silicon Valley, Europe even, it's very easy for an English person or an American to fundraise from Silicon Valley or New York and come to Africa and launch a venture. It sounds unfair, but it's the reality. What was frustrating about seeing these deals is that we couldn't really invest because if we did, we would quickly become a fund that backs foreign companies coming to Africa, and Savannah Fund is meant to be backing African startups. That's 1. 2, the prices were very expensive for what we saw. So a typical example would be, someone would have a slide saying, we're going to invest, we're going to grow financial inclusion. Look at M-Pesa, look at Tigo Pesa. We're going to invest in financial inclusion, and they have a nice big slide that shows the gaps in financial inclusion. They still get funded even though they probably have never been to Africa often. They can't speak the local language, they can't execute very easily, but they're still able to get sizable amount of money, $500,000, even $1 million plus, just to get going. And unfortunately, Africans find that's very challenging to access that kind of money. It's easier to get if you're connected. And even I at Savannah Fund, being Tanzanian, I have 2 foreign partners in the fund, help me fundraise. But it's, and also I have studied, and lived in the UK and US for 11 years before I came back to East Africa. And still, I think if I went by myself to fundraise, I probably wouldn't be able to get it without a partner who could add credibility. So that's growing, that piece. In fact, Disrupt Africa did a report last year that claimed about $185 million of venture capital funding went into startups in Africa. And if you dig into that report, you'll probably find that a good 80% of that is probably foreign-backed coming into Africa. So that's the very sad news that I wanted to make sure that everyone understands. The other aspect of I guess, kind of on the flip side to that is local angel networks and local funds. So when we started Savannah Fund, we were maybe like the 2nd or 3rd venture capital fund focused on Africa technology startups. So it was really, really not that mature a sector. And of the other investors are also investing, they're quite narrow in their focuses, different countries only. not necessarily Pan-Africa. And also, we found that they had different styles to how we invested, and also narrowing sectors. So they would maybe do only agriculture or say financial services. The other aspect was a flavor of these funds was typically more focused on South Africa and Nigeria. So those got more capital. And I spent actually the last 3 years trying to get more, not necessarily institutions, but angel investors. So how do you convince the rich Tanzanian or the rich Kenyan or the rich Nigerian to put money into startups? And in the last 3 years, I've found that Nigeria has developed the quickest. Maybe it's because they have lots of oil money floating around. People have lots of spare money to invest in other things. But Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda, very, very low on angel investing. South Africa, pretty good. And so this actually created a problem because some foreign investors new to Africa wouldn't invest in startups in Africa unless they had a local investor there as well. So that's actually really challenging to build a local ecosystem. But ultimately, I don't think we will develop the funding ecosystem without having local investors play a part, especially angels, because they typically are the first check into a startup. They can write $10,000, $50,000, even $100,000, and that's still missing but growing. So one suggestion I have for the different countries, including Tanzania, is to start putting together angel networks. So when I was in Ethiopia about 3 weeks ago, they're even further behind than Tanzania, and the economy is much more closed. Yet the Ethiopians were trying to think about how to create an angel network, and I spent maybe about 3 or 4 hours talking to executives, managers at Techno, because Techno has a factory in Ethiopia. They assemble phones there, a bunch of software developers, and it was really challenging because they found it hard to even organize, because government in Ethiopia makes it hard to organize, right? So if you set up a Ethiopia Angels Fund, the government may say, hey, what's this? You can't do this, we have to be involved, and that makes it very tricky to do investing. In South Africa, they've had quite a few angel networks there pop up in the last 10 years. And then from then, you typically get institutions coming in after that. The other area of investing that I should also mention is impact investing. So this is definitely, obviously, definitely more foreign driven. It can be confusing to entrepreneurs what impact investing actually means. I'm sure some of you who run social enterprises know who these people are. But what I found when I started Savannah Fund was that they didn't take much risk either, right? And a lot of them were actually headquartered outside of Africa, which also made it challenging because the distance makes it hard. And so I almost lump them in the same category as the foreign venture capital investors, because they typically have a decision-making sort of center outside of Africa, and that makes it very, very hard. Just to give you an example, I went to the US 4 times last year to fundraise for my own fund. It's very tiring, right? And always the West Coast, not just East Coast. And I can imagine if those investors are coming to Africa to invest, and they haven't got any offices on the ground, and even if they do, they often don't empower the local fund managers to actually make any decisions. They have to not only come to Africa to look at deals, but they also have to do due diligence. They have to meet with other potential, the customers, meet with the government, understand how the ecosystem works. And so those are kind of the 3 different areas of investment I've seen in Africa. It's growing, but I hope that the angel side can grow faster. Any questions?
In a way, like, what is it going to take to get the angel investors, the local angel investors on board? Is it more like thinking through the marketing or how to get them to actually be interested in this product? Because that's now they're used to stashing their money away or to building more concrete things. Yeah,
there is some good news. Like, what I've noticed is typically, obviously, angels in a local market like Tanzania often have made their money. They're much older, higher generation than us. And so typically when you start seeing technology get into their lives like in a big way, so I'm talking about technology focus here as an example, right, as the area I'm in, you'll start to see them start to ask, wait a minute, why hasn't a Tanzanian built this app? Like, I know about Netflix, but where's the local version? I want to watch bongo movies, right? And that tends to be the beginning of them thinking like, wait a minute, is there an opportunity here? The other area I've seen is when things get even closer than they even thought. So maybe they've used Uber in the US or London, and suddenly they use it in Nairobi or Johannesburg or Lagos, and they go, whoa, it's actually here, right? And they see other alternatives, and then they think, okay, I understand this model, I can invest. I think that's dangerous because it also leads to a copy-clone mentality. Oh, because Uber works in the US or Europe and they're in Africa, maybe I should invest in another one. And they don't realize that it might be a winner-takes-all market. So and then from them, they start to realize, so maybe they'll do 1 or 2 investments and they'll maybe make mistakes or they'll succeed. But then they'll realize that, oh, I need to spread my bets more. I need to look deeply into how this industry works. It helps if they're from that industry, right? So if you have someone who's from the ICT industry, then it's easier for them to ramp up. The other area I think that hasn't been done in Africa is incentives by government, right? So you provide some sort of tax relief for angel investing, right? That's worked pretty well in the UK, and the UK had a real problem with this for a long time, but they provided incentives for angel investors to invest, and that made it easy for the wealthy to invest. And then the final thing I would say is that if angels can be organized, that's why these networks are important, then they can learn from each other, right? So typically how an angel network would work is maybe you have a membership scheme, and you make it slightly fun, but not too fun. So it could be a whiskey club. You meet once a month in a bar, and you discuss, and you pay a membership fee, and you pool money. Maybe that part of that fee is funds, or you say you get access. And in the background, there's a team that's diligencing startups over the month, and then they pick the best 10 to come and pitch in the club at the end of the month, and then from that you obviously get investment. Of course, that's been tried a few times, and there's been some behavioral isures from the investors typically. And so, for example, you could put in something like, if you don't invest once every 6 months, you get kicked out, right? So that way it forces the angels to take risks, because it's easy to just pay a fee and meet your buddies for drinking and then not actually do anything. So those are some suggestions I have for how you can build a local ecosystem. Probably most advanced in Africa, but growing in Nigeria the most.